right, here we go. Another day, another live stream. So today, it's a little bit up in the air what we're going to do. And I've had multiple technical issues. So of course, that's what this show's about, is we need better DevOps, including my own workflow for setting things up. All right, so you let me know how the audio sounds. And of course, always let me know when there's a technical problem, because I'm just one person sitting here at my desk, and sometimes you never really know whether things are making it to the internet. Hi, my name is Brett. This is my live show. I'm on the internet every Thursday talking about containers, DevOps, Docker, Kubernetes, cloud. Today, it sounds like we're maybe going to talk about Docker volume backups and maybe some Swarm data storage, maybe. Sounds like that's the votes from Twitter and a couple on LinkedIn. But before we get to that, if you're a member on my Patreon page, I want to thank you again so much for your support. We're getting now multiple people a week signing up for that. So look for more happening soon on that. I'm hoping to maybe somehow figure out some ways to add benefits. We're working on some new course stuff. There's gonna be some stuff this year, hopefully. So if the plans go according to plan and we don't have more pandemics and more chaos in the world. So that's all gonna happen. And so if you want to keep track of everything I'm doing, basically all the open source content and some paid content that I release, but mostly free, you can go over to patreon.com/Brett Fisher. You can actually get that link over there at brettfisher.com. And you can also get in the description, and you should also sign up for all the socials for me, including YouTube, so you can watch me every week. And if you missed this show, it turns into an audio-only podcast, at least when it makes sense, right? So when I have a special guest and we talk about a topic, that shows up on my podcast, which you can also get over there. And this week on the podcast, I just released a new episode that was kind of one of the first times I did a monologue. It wasn't a live stream that turned into a podcast. It was a monologue on Docker's ACI and ECS betas. So if you've been watching for the last month, you have seen me fail at demoing many different tools from Docker, but one of them is the new Azure ACI beta for deploying to ACI, which is not an orchestrator. It's just a way to deploy containers to a server using an Azure API, not a Docker API. Big distinction. And then their newest beta is with AWS's ECS, which is an orchestrator, and specifically deploying using the Docker command line to AWS ECS Fargate, which would be a potential production setup, right? It would be an orchestrator where you could have failures that would recover, you'd have health checks and all that stuff. So there's a lot of context with how those betas are happening, why Docker is doing this now, why aren't they just doing like better Docker API and Docker machine and all that kind of stuff. So I did a 20 to 30 minute podcast this week, which you can go to Let me bring this up. Podcast.brettfisher.com. And I'll put that into chat. So you can check out that. It's not quite every week. I'm not good enough to keep it consistent on a weekly basis. But check out that podcast. And the latest one, today, or a couple days ago, actually released a new episode that's kind of my prediction on where Docker is taking Docker. And that, sure, we have the Docker engine, we have new features coming out in the engine and bug fixes, but where is Docker, the company, focusing on making the developer experience better? And that's not necessarily in helping us deploy servers. And that's or running their own orchestrator. So Swarm largely has been taken over as a open source project by Mirantis, the company who, even though they bought all the enterprise stuff, they're still supporting the open source. So they're supporting SwarmKit. And of course, if we're going to demo some Swarm stuff today, we're going to be using basically a combo of, there's two teams there now. There's Docker and Mirantis. They're both technically having to manage Swarm But don't think of Swarm as like the thing that's going to get amazing new features from Docker. If they're going to get big new features, it's probably going to be from Mirantis. So anyway, check out that podcast. Let's go to chat. Let's see what some of the things that we're talking about. So early on, Biker was actually talking about, before the show started, on a swarm. So it sounds like, and I can't put these on the screen because they were before the stream started. So, the other, basically a container's hanging. I get DNS resolution, but the container's on the third node and the third node. So this kind of just talks about like how do you, in a swarm, how do you troubleshoot, or really this is Kubernetes as well. How do you troubleshoot a node and make sure that that node is working correctly? So the first thing I would break it down into validate the current infrastructure and it's working well. So the first thing I would do is I would go to that server. If I thought there was something funky with that container, I would exec into that container and validate that that container is at least working. You could actually jump into that network on that same server. So if you deployed your services with the overlay networking with the attachable option, then you could do a Docker run on that server and be inside that network and then troubleshoot from a networking perspective on that server, right? Is the Docker overlay networking broke? If it is, the first thing I want to do is validate that it works on that server. Can I get from that server container on that same overlay network on that same server to another one? And the way you would do that is either do a Docker run with attachable to the overlay network, or you would create a new service that's only deployable on that node. So you would make a constraint that forces it to that node on that overlay network. Then basically attach, well, it's not easy to attach on a swarm service. So I would just do an exec maybe. Get in there, go and troubleshoot to see if that network works on that server. Then can I get from that overlay network on that server to other nodes? So is it broken out? Think of it like a physical network. I'm troubleshooting. I'm trying to get out of my new little test container, maybe using something like NetShoot, right? I always talk about NetShoot. So using NetShoot to get out of that container to the rest of the Docker network and other networks. So validating that network is at least working. Maybe spinning up a brand new temporary service of 3 Nginxes and then jumping into one on node 2 and then trying to curl node 3, trying to just validate that the overlay network that it's on is working, because that is, I guess, what you're suggesting or thinking that it might be. If you thought it was something deeper, like everything on that node starting to act funky, then I wouldn't even troubleshoot necessarily in the container yet. I would jump on that node, look at that node itself to see if, is resource utilization an issue? Am I able to even get into the server? Is it completely overrun so that SSH doesn't even work? Those are the kind of things that I would look at on that server. And then, of course, if there's a problem with the server, you just toss it out. You basically would, you could, when you do a node drain, so you would do a Docker node, I'm not sure if it's -- Docker node update availability equals drain, I think is the command. And so that would safely give it wouldn't be killing the containers unless they couldn't be stopped. It would give them a proper shutdown. So hopefully your whole shutdown and health check routine is solid so that no valid containers would actually break in moving from one node to another, right? So you drain that node, and then no new containers will go to that node, and you could bring up maybe a fourth node if you had capacity issues. I would bring up the fourth node first, then drain the third node so that the fourth node would get the extra containers, hopefully, because it would be empty. And so that's kind of just spitballing it, how I would troubleshoot a bad node or a bad container on a node, or maybe even bad networking on a node. Sometimes if overlays break, they do break on a node specifically, and it has to do with the gossip networking and maybe just some funkiness with the kernel. So I would reboot the host, and if it didn't resolve after one reboot, I would just trash the node. I would do a Docker node drain and drain the node, then trash it and rebuild it. Which is why it's important to have really easy, availability groups where you can spin up new nodes really quickly. All right, let's move on. All right, hello everyone. Hello. Thanks for the audio checks, everyone. I had audio only in one ear when I started, and it was making me think that I had something broken, but it's probably just my headphones. All right, so we got to vote for backups MySQL. We can definitely demo that. I need a little to-do list. So let's make a to-do list for the show, so we all know what the heck I'm going to be doing here. So let's make this little to-do list. Let's put it over here, and we're going to do okay, so first we're going to demo Vackup. Then we're going to let's do a demo of a MySQL example. And then if we get time, swarm volumes. How's that? Ooh, that's too big. Put that right there. All right, so there's maybe a to-do list. And we can keep adding to it, and we'll see how much we can get to. All right. Networking diagnostics, yeah. I'd love to do I'd love to do a whole Udemy course on networking. Just like modern networking in the cloud, not just traditional 30-year-old TCP/IP concepts, but like start teaching someone basic networking, but going, back in the old days when I would read TCP/IP Unleashed, right? It was like you were learning about Telnet and all sorts of other very old Unix type solutions that didn't really, because there's two things, right? There's learning networking and there's learning networking tools. And so if you can learn both at the same time, if you can learn TCP dump while you're also learning how networking works, I think it's more valuable, more interesting than just giving a bunch of concepts. But yeah, I'd love to have some time to do that. When will you release Cert Manager content on Kubernetes course? All right, so the very end of the Kubernetes Mastery course has the list of topics, and they're generally in order of the slides. So if you look at the slides, there's already hundreds and hundreds of slides that are already in the slide deck. And so next up, it's storage, including volumes, as well as more persistent, scalable solutions like persistent volumes, and then like persistent volume claims, stuff like that. And then we're going to do Helm and customize and CRDs and operators. And then there's some other things in there. I think maybe some remote admin, stuff like that. And then maybe some cluster setup, some cloud cluster setup. So like Cert Manager is a ways out. Like I have no content for it. And it's not that I won't do it. It's just there is 6 months of content that I have to make before Cert Manager gets started, because obviously it's a very popular tool, but there are so many ways to manage certificates. Like a lot of people just SSH with their load balancers, or SSL rather with their load balancers. They do the TLS outside the cluster. So that's going to come later. But it's a great topic. I'd love to talk about it. Yeah. Best practices for authentication systems. Docker-friendly user auth service architecture where authorized users should have access to cloud app API best practices for. Well, that's so. I think what you're asking about is maybe. Can I make this smaller? Yeah, it doesn't work. No. A gigantic head. All right, so we're not going to do that. Let's do it like this. Oh, see, that's too small. Sponsor a thing. Sponsor a thing on the internet. 18? That's what I had it at. There you go. That's a little better. So K's or KS or however you K's. So if you're on Swarm, then if you're talking about administrative access, just use Portainer. You can use Docker Enterprise Edition if you want a paid enterprise solution. If you want a smaller free solution, there's Portainer. I'm not sure. Yeah, you're saying Docker, not Kubernetes. So have access to Cloud App API. I'm not sure what you mean by Cloud App. So you ask more specific questions if you have them. I'm currently learning on Docker Mastery. Thank you for being a student. And what else do I need to learn before starting a job in DevOps? So I have a URL for that. That's brett.show/DevOps. So come on. Anyway, brett.show/DevOps. Look in the chat. Great question. And that's generally my topics for people new to DevOps and how you should proceed. Basically, learning clouds first, right? Because most DevOps jobs are going to be focused on the cloud, not everything, but even if they are doing data center stuff, they're probably hybrid. So you're going to need to know a cloud. So you probably should get a cloud certification. Pick the cloud of the companies that you're going to apply to. If you're going to, if you want to do AWS, which is probably the more popular one in internet service provider, like traditional software solutions. And then if you want, but if you're maybe more government based, or if you want to look for government jobs, or if you're more of a Microsoft person, you're going to pick Azure. If you're looking at more enterprise solutions, they tend to favor. I wouldn't say the majority of them are on Azure, but there's more likely that they will be Azure versus software companies. If you're trying to work for a tech company, they're most usually going to be on Google or AWS. That's just a generalization. Obviously, there's all sorts of exceptions to that rule. But pick a cloud, get certified in it, get multiple certifications in it. If you're doing a DevOps job, you don't necessarily have to have a Kubernetes cert to get a DevOps job, right? So many companies still don't have Kubernetes, and if they do, you may not be doing anything in DevOps with Kubernetes, depending on the size of your team. You might be focused specifically on the software supply chain, not so much on operations of Kubernetes clusters. So at this point, I would not recommend the Docker DCI certification unless you think you're going to apply for a company that is specifically using Docker Enterprise, which at last count was only about 700 companies in the world. So if you've got a ton of certifications and you're just looking for one more to get, I would actually skip DCI, try Kubernetes. If you've already got that, you've got the clouds, you've got like a Network Plus, an A Plus, you've got all these other things, then I would probably do programming languages. Learn Python or Golang and look at certifications around those, or maybe JavaScript for Node.js. Those are the three most popular, besides Bash, the three most popular automation languages that I see advanced DevOps people doing. But you could probably get a lot of great jobs without ever having, a developer certification, just as long as you know how to write some basic scripts. That's what I would recommend. All right. For me, audio is in right ear. That is so wild. So the audio is only on one ear. So yeah, where? Let's see. Right. Let me actually see if I can. Let me just show you what I'm doing on my computer. So this is a really cool audio routing tool called Audio Hijack. So for those of you listening live, let's. I'm going to play some music, and let's see if you can hear music in both ears, but audio only in my right. And I'm going to throw a meter. All right, so it looks like it's coming through left and right. Testing. Yeah. Anyway, this is for Mac only, but it's an app called Audio Hijack. In case you're curious, it's really cool. Basically, it's like a software mixer board that allows me to completely control. Oh, and I messed it up. Problem with doing this live is this is a really cool ducking thing where it allows me to have music, but when I talk, it cuts down on the music. Yeah, so I don't know if it's a hardware problem on my mic, a software problem with my computer. I need to reboot. All right, so someone let me know if they heard that music on both ears and if it's just my mic in one ear, and we'll hopefully eventually figure it out in the stream. All right. Okay, networking. Let's see. Do I have any access to overlay networks from Node? So no, you don't, unless that overlay network had -- attachable. You won't necessarily. I mean, if you're on the host, technically yes, you can use TCP dump. If you're root on a host, you can access every packet on that network, but it'll be tricky for you to run a container on a node and access a network from Docker run unless you've made that overlay network attachable. Technically, it lowers the security a little bit because it means that anyone who compromises a host can then access overlay networks from other containers. It basically, in theory, I would always use attachable probably in production, because if someone's rogue on my host and they can use Docker run, then they already basically have root on my host, so they're going to be able to access every packet on that server anyway. So it technically lowers the security, because what it means is that if you, by default, a swarm overlay network can only be accessed by other swarm service containers. It can't be accessed by a Docker run container. But if you make it attachable, when you set it up, when you create the overlay network, it's -- attachable, I think. It will allow it to be attached by Docker run on that server. So, or maybe any server, now that I think about it. All right, I have only write audio. Bubbling noise on the left. Awesome. Why am I using Docker Swarm, not Kubernetes? I don't know if you're asking me that or someone else that. Just different strokes for different folks. Swarm is easy to use. It's very little infrastructure, very little resources. Kubernetes needs a lot more complexity, a lot more infrastructure. It can do a lot more, but if you don't need all that, then why do that, right? Like, why deploy Ansible to install an application on your machine when if you only have to install one command on one server? Do you really need Ansible to do that? It's one of those things where maybe you don't need the complete complexity of Kubernetes, or you don't need any of the CRDs or operators of Kubernetes, and you just want to keep it simple. The problem with Swarm is that you will have to manage the infrastructure. We're getting to a point now with Kubernetes where you can do things like Fargate and never have to manage infrastructure. But with Swarm, you're going to have to be a server manager. So I guess that's a negative for Swarm in terms of complexity. But Swarm's in general really easy to manage. So. Just missing HTTPS content and ingress chapter on Kubernetes course. So excellent point. So in the Kubernetes mastery course, Uh, I did not give examples of using Let's Encrypt with traffic, which is I like using traffic because then I don't have to use Cert Manager unless you really want a fully redundant solution. So like, there's always gotchas and there's always complexities, but I hear what you're saying. The challenge with HTTPS is that in the real world, people are using Let's Encrypt a lot, new people that are doing point containers, and so that there's a lot of things you have to do to be able to use Cert Manager with Let's Encrypt or Cert Manager with or traffic with Let's Encrypt because it has to be on the internet. You have to be publicly accessible, and there can't be a load balancer in front of it because it'll trip it out. And I think there's so many other levels of complexity before all that happens, and you haven't learned that in the course yet. You haven't learned deploying multi-node clusters on the cloud. Like so, I couldn't really throw in the HTTPS solution early on in the course because it assumed you knew a lot of other things you don't maybe know yet if you're new to Kubernetes. So excellent point. Thanks for that feedback, and I hope that we can get some of that content in there because I think SSL obviously is a very almost everyone that's using Kubernetes is going to need some sort of TLS, right? So I hear you. I agree with you. It's just not in the near term. Yeah. So, Elton's got a new book on Docker in a month of lunches. And thanks, Charlie, for pimping his stuff. Elton's stuff is great. And let's see if I can find that. Just a Docker in a month of lunches. And let's see. Is it videos? Videos, Charlie? Oh, it's a book. All right, so I'm gonna give you. So this is Docker. Yeah, I don't know if there's a link to the book in there, but yeah. Elton's awesome. He's been on this show multiple times, so I'm a friend. I'm a fan and a friend, but I'm a fan of his work for sure. Certifications, we've already talked about that multiple times already today. Clouds first. If you look up in the chat, brett.show/DevOps will give you sort of my recommended path with some links to other recommended paths and certifications and tools that you need to learn. Yeah, I'm new to Docker. Just started your Udemy course. Thanks for being a Udemy course person. Docker Master essentially become. All right, so we're going to get to some more of this chat later. Sorry that if I don't get to your question right away, but I want to actually do some things, and then we'll get to some chat. So let's mix this up. All right, so did anyone tell me about my audio with the music? Let's see. Only right ear. Music only in right ear. Okay, so it's something to do with my. That is crazy. Don't know why that would be a problem. All right. So I will have to work on the audio problem later, unfortunately. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to do this, the to-do list up here, demo Docker Vackup. So I created a tool. I've shared it a couple times. You may have heard of it. but it's pretty new. It's like a month old. Yeah. And so it's nothing really fancy, but it's really just automating some Docker commands inside a script. It was actually something that I tried to make as a Docker plugin for the command line, but I'm not sure what the future of Docker command line plugins are. Docker really hasn't added any lately, other than actually this ECS beta. So I was a little nervous making a Docker command line plugin, and it doesn't. This tool doesn't even really need that. There's not really any functionality because it's not using the Docker API. It's just using Docker commands. So making a Docker plugin just made you have to type more. So this is really just an SH script. Oh, actually, it's a bash script technically. A bash script that automates, basically gives you one command that will then do multiple commands in the background. And so all you need to do on your system is either clone the repo or just download this Vackup file, which is just a shell script, right? I can click on it. It's a bash script. And then either move or do a symlink to it. I probably should just put a command on here on how to download it. I probably need to do that. In fact, let's make an issue. Add quick install commands to the README. All right. So the purpose of this is if you, so here's the scenario. A couple of scenarios. One is that you need to get something in a volume from one machine to another, and you would like to use a registry to do that rather than something like SSH's SCP, or some other rsync tool or something like that, right? You don't want to. You're not necessarily savvy in all those tools, and you just want to use Docker itself. So you could technically store data in an image and then put that image in a registry, and then put that data somewhere else. Now, is that the best use of a registry in production? Are we supposed to be using Docker registries for backups? Not really. But really, all a registry is an HTTP-based storage system. It's a back-end storage system with an API front end. That's all a registry is. And so we could exploit it and do stuff in it, right? Like moving data around, maybe putting a backup of some. Now, realize that most registries by default they're open, so you don't want to put any private data in there. Obviously, if you were ever going to put something like that in there, you'd want to at least make it a private repo. And oh, by the way, you see my puppy? Puppers, come here. I have a puppy. Let's just get distracted by puppies for a second. Come here, buddy. Come here. Oh. And you can say hi to the internet. And they're over there, but you're just gonna look at me, aren't you? And then there's the microphone. So he's a 6-month-old Cavalier King Charles Spaniel, and his name is Finn, like from Star Wars. All right, good boy. And he's probably trying to eat my green screen at this moment. All right, so anyway, back to the Vackup. So on Vackup, the command, in this case, once I get it on my system, is just Vackup. And then it gives me some stuff. All right, buddy. All right, so that's one scenario, is moving data around through a registry. I'm not necessarily saying you should do it, but it is possible. People have asked, hey, how do I download a sample database for WordPress that I have maybe some pre-filled stuff in? Or how do I deploy WordPress or some blog engine or content management systems? I have a bunch of default content, like the content directory that's images and stuff and themes and stuff like that. And I want to use Docker Hub as a way to get that stuff out there. Well, there's not really any way to do that. This could be a path to doing that. And then the other scenario is, what if I just need to do a Docker update on my Docker desktop and I'm afraid it's going to wipe my machine out and I don't want to lose my volume. So I need to just export them really quick into a tarball on my machine, and then I'll import them when I come back, to the new machine. So those are all possible with a combination of using images to store data, because we can do that, and then maybe starting with a very slim, or not necessarily a scratch image, but a very tiny image using BusyBox, which BusyBox is a meg image, but it at least gives you things like bash and other common commands, ping and curl, stuff like that. And so you could have that basic image, then store the data in a specific location that's consistent. And then if you had some commands that would allow you to export import using the image command, and then you could commit using the Docker Docker image commit command that would save a container to image. So you could exploit and use all the existing commands to get a volume set of features like you would have with an image command, right? So because we have all these image commands for export, import, load, save, but we don't have those with volume. So this automates that. It essentially uses existing Docker commands, and usually, so there's 4 of these main commands. 2 of them are for export import. That is good for basically saving data in a volume to your local machine inside of a gzipped tarball, and then you can do whatever you want with that. Put it on a USB stick, copy it to your NAS server, whatever. And then there is backup, save, and load. And this is designed to save or load volume data in or from an image so that you could then use a registry potentially, or just your local Docker, but you could basically back up your volumes to a local Docker image, but I'm not sure what that would use that for. It would more likely be so that I could push it to a registry real quick, and then I could share it with someone else, right? So in theory, this would probably be more likely used in a private registry where your team needs some sample data, and then maybe like your apps need sample data instead of storing it in the repo for your app, or having a separate Git repo using large files in Git. Like you could avoid all that, and just put that gig of data or whatever you have in an image, and then have a standard process for where it's stored in that image. How do you get it out of that image? How do you get it back into the same location that it was came from? So the way that this basically works, before I show you all the magic, is I created this. I decided that a directory. Let's talk about the registry ones first, because that's kind of interesting. So it copies the data into an image at just a directory I call /volume data. So it's a consistent location regardless of the volume. It copies the whole volume in. It's not like a filter. There's no fancy filtering or only backup certain. It's basically whatever was in the volume. Everything you have in the volume, including permissions, is copied into the volume data directory in the image. So if you move that image around, you're moving that volume data, and when you were to use a Docker load command, it would then copy it back out of that location into a volume of your choice. If you don't have a volume already, the name you give the volume will be the volume it creates. So it's smart enough to look for a volume. If it doesn't see it, it'll create a new one. I haven't had, by the way, had a lot of people test this. I don't actually have any feedback from anyone. So if you want to check this out, if you have a potential use for this, I don't know if it's useful to people, but someone asked about it one day, and I got a bug up my butt and thought, I'm just going to give this a shot. And I spent a weekend on it, like a Sunday, sitting in front of the TV, and I was inspired actually by all of the clip stuff from Lucas. So if you do, if you check this out over here, this is Clip is a neat little plugin manager for the Docker command line, which I said I didn't actually end up using a Docker plugin per se because I didn't really need it. But Docker Clip here is a neat little way to add plugins, and most of it's just stuff that you can use independently without the Docker command line, like a dive command or microscan. But it's convenience, and Docker command line has plugin support, so you can do that kind of stuff there. So go check out his plugin support there. And another Docker captain that's making really cool stuff. He also did some really cool stuff lately on how to get into a container like a sidecar by just kind of mounting the PID and other stuff. And I don't actually have the URL for that. So, all right. So let me demo this. Let me see if I got any volumes. All right, so I have a bunch of random volumes, but let's do a real world setup. So let's see, let me go into, I'm going to deploy Ghost in MySQL. Dog versus cat. Actually, let's go over to. If you don't know about my dog versus cat, it's basically a bunch of samples that work on Swarm. But really, what it's about is using Compose. So I wanted to have Kubernetes manifest later, but I just never got around to it. The idea was it's a basic setup of a multi-website setup with a front-end proxy that handles Let's Encrypt. So we're using traffic, and then multiple things on the back end, including a static website, a Ghost blog, the voting app and that's kind of where the dog versus cat came from. Is it's using the Docker voting example demo app that allows you to have a front end and a back end and a Postgres database with a queue using Redis. So using all this stuff, and it's using Compose YAML, which is interesting now that we have Docker ECS plugin and Docker ACI plugin. This actually becomes more valuable because you could deploy to ECS, presumably, with this stuff. So there might be new life into this repo of mine because once I started focusing on my Kubernetes stuff content over the last year, this didn't get a lot of love. So, but people still use it every day. All right, so I probably need to add some new to-dos for like putting in stuff that's ECS and ACI compatible for those betas. So one of the things I do in here is I have a stack Ghost, and I have a stack SQLite Ghost. So I have two options for Ghost. The SQLite Ghost uses the default built-in database of the Ghost blogging engine, and so that's not very interesting because it's not going to need to talk to a database with a volume. It does have its own volume, so that I guess maybe that is a valid setup here. Let's just try that first. It's actually probably the simpler one. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a Ghost container, and the Ghost container only needs itself to run. It actually can store its own content and its own flat file SQLite inside the same volume, and though you might want to split them out into separate volumes. And then in theory, I could move that to somewhere else and then have all that same content. Now, again, the database, I don't know if SQLite databases for Ghost have passwords. I actually haven't dived into the Ghost code to see if they create some sort of random password. I have a feeling they don't because it's local on the box, so they just keep it open to localhost. So we maybe don't have to worry about that kind of password stuff, but it will probably have my password that I would type into the web administrative interface. So again, this is got to be careful. If you're going to put real data into an image and put it on a registry, it's probably not the best idea. But sample data might be a good thing. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a Ghost simple setup, and I'm just going to go to Docker Hub and look at the Ghost app and use they have an example for Compose, right? So I could technically use this, although we're not going to use a database setup yet. It might actually be harder to do their own stuff. So I'm going to do a Docker. I'm going to clean up my whole system so it's nice and clean for this. So backup URL for backup. Backup is here. And I mean, there's lots of advanced solutions out there in terms of enterprise backup tools that work in containers, but that's not what I was trying to do here. I was simply trying to give someone an easy command for moving things in and out of a volume. All right, so now when I do a Docker volume LLS, I'm clear. You know, I don't have this gunk filling it up. All right, so let's actually call it this. All right, so Docker compose YAML. Oops. Nope. I want that. All right, so this is actually a kind of complicated example because it always has the database. And notice that the database here, by the way, doesn't have a volume. So let's go get that volume from my setup. All right, so in the Docker, the dogs versus cats, which I will put up here in chat again, dog versus cats, I have another stack called Stack Ghost. And this is using a MySQL database. And by the way, one of our things today was MySQL backup example. Someone gave that. So the simplest backup example I can give you, and you're probably going to want to do something more production savvy that will handle multiple containers. If you're using Kubernetes, we've actually had on this show this year other Kubernetes backup solutions. So this thing right here, this is kind of small, but this little, can I wrap? No, bummer. All right. So look at this container. This is the simplest backup container solution I have. It's basically a Docker Swarm service that overrides the MySQL image, which has all the MySQL client tools in it, including the dump and the imports and all that stuff. And then it overrides the command. Instead of running a MySQL server, it simply does a while loop inside a bash, and it runs the MySQL dump. Then it uses the root username which is the default really, and the password that you're tying it into from a Docker secret. So I'm binding it down to the Docker secret there with the environment variable, and I add the secret to it from the Docker secret, so it's nice and secure. So it's using the same MySQL root password. It's saying all databases, and I thought there was another option in here. There's another option in here, by the way, that you might want to use. Single transaction true, and then there's an option you can throw in here for table locking, which I don't have in here. But the point is that it does that export and puts it into a MySQL file and dates it using bash, and then sleeps for an hour, and then repeats with a new date. So it doesn't do file cleanup. It doesn't do a lot of stuff that you would need. It doesn't get it off server. Although in this situation, what I do is I make this a volume. So the backups are going to a volume that presumably is on your cloud storage. And in this file, the cloud storage would be under Rexray. So anyway, that's a demo of how to do a traditional backup there. But that's not what we're trying to do, right? We're simply trying to move stuff around. So I'm going to do this volume inside of my example. And then we do need to specify volumes. And we'll just do db. And then for giggles, we're going to do a ghost volume as well. Do I not have? Oh, yeah, no, that's ghost. Okay, so I'm already realizing that this one's out of date. I'm missing the content directory. So SQLite ghost. And then content. That's the other volume we need, because whenever you make a blog post in a blog, you usually upload an image or something, and that is not stored in a database typically. So we're going to do that. And so we're going to call that one content. Now, we're not trying to use fancy storage, right? We're just going to use on-node storage for now to keep it simple. And let's see if this works. All right. Now, if we just did Docker Compose up, let's see if it actually works. And the reason it's calling them, right, just a reminder on compose stuff, the reason it's calling it Vackup is that's the name of the directory. So your project scope inside of, oops, over here, your project scope is Database is still coming up. Creating tables. You saw a couple of reboots in there, and that's kind of normal, right? It's a distributed app, so the website came up before the database. So, all right. All right, so I'm actually gonna spin up. I'm gonna do this in here so we can kind of keep the logs, right? Keep the logs here, and then we'll make changes over here as we need. So in theory, let's see, what did I? Let's look at the Docker Compose port, 8080. So localhost 8080, I'm using Docker Desktop on a Mac. All right, so I have my Ghost blog, and then if I go to /ghost, I'm gonna create an account. All right. All right. So now I have the site. Let's create a really quick post. And then we're also going to throw in an image just to make it more complicated. Why not? So let me find an image. Yes. So I actually captured. I was so happy when I finally finished my taxes this year that I submitted. I have a screenshot of the transmit button. So there we go. I drug in an image. It's a part of the post. Let's publish it. All right. Let's go validate that that's there. Oh, wrong site. Okay, over here. All right. Boom. All right, so we have the first post. If I go to the home screen, I should see the first post. It's not actually showing me the image in the front, but I can tell when I go in. All right, so this allows us to have data both in the database and both in the content, right? So let's go back now. And in theory, the only way you really want to do a backup of a database, by the way, is you want to do it either through the backup tools, which is usually the best way to go. And I'm guessing that it aired out on an email. Yeah, it always airs out on email locally. Okay, so the reason you want to use those backup tools is that you typically can't stop the database in today's world in order to do a backup, and that's the only way you're going to get a stable file backup, right? You can't just copy and open MySQL database. There are some tools that are designed to do that. Like I think Redis can do that technically, because it just appends or something. But you tend to want to always use the backup tools. So you would probably need some other tool that's creating a backup automatically, like I showed you, into a stable place. But in here, we could always just stop, right? Because we're not production. And now I have two volumes. Now, if I go back to my backup command line, I remember that if I wanted to back up that into a gzip, I could do a backup export. By the way, let's just do. I don't have command completion on this utility yet, so I have to remember the names of the databases. All right, so we can do a Docker, a backup. I don't know if you can see that on the screen. Yeah, backup, export. So this is going to basically, it's going to start up a container. It's going to mount that volume into the container. Then it's going to mount my current directory into a bind mount. And then it's going to tarball everything that's in that volume, gzip it up. so it's compressed, and then store it on my local file on whatever system I'm running the Docker command line from. So if this is a server remotely, it would be on my local system, not on the server, if I'm running the command line from my local machine, right? Because it's the context of whatever Docker is using. You can see my context actually on my command line. That's my Docker context, which is my local machine. And so we'll do backup. Let's do the database first. And then I just need to name the file. So my blog DB. I can't remember if I added the extension. I don't think I have the intelligence to automatically add the extension. So not that it matters. It'll still work, but if you want it to be. All right, so that did a file-based backup. It was not a MySQL-based backup. It was a file-based. So again, that would only be safe if the container was stopped. So now I should see, okay, so I see a tarball here that is a little over like 6 meg in size, about. Seems reasonable for just the stock database setup. Now, if I wanted to create now let's tear down the site, right? So let's do a Docker, let's do it over here. So this is where we're doing Docker compose commands. Let's do a Docker compose down -v, which will delete not just the containers, but also the volumes as well. And then I do a Docker volume ls, right? So that's a bummer. We've lost our data. So let's go over here and we're going to restore it. So the opposite is true of the import command. So when you look at the backup import, actually I don't have context sensitive help because it's like this is like a 1.0, right? It's not even a 1.0. This is like a 0.1. So it's the opposite order. So it's from file to volume. So I want to do backup import this file into a new volume that we know what we're going to call it because it's what compose calls it. So it's going to be the name of the directory and then the name of the database we're restoring. So it's backup DB. That's what the compose file tells it to be, is called DB, right? So it creates the volume, then it imports it. So now if I do a Docker volume ls, then I have that same volume. And if I do a Docker compose up, hopefully it will work. And that was faster. Look at that. The first post works. So that was, so actually, how does that work? Because that file, we didn't back up the ghost. Let me try that again. Is it really refreshing? Ah, okay. See, the image is gone, right? Because I intentionally kind of wanted to fail there. So the database works, but the backup, we didn't do a backup of Ghost. So we're not going to get that image because the images are typically the uploads, and those are what's stored in the content of most, like WordPress and Ghost are the same way. Other ones work the same way as well. I think Drupal's also the same way. And so we would need to make sure we back up both and then restore both, because the database is going to have the file path to whatever file, and it's missing here. In fact, if I go in here, see, it's a broken image because it can't find that inside the file system. And so, yeah, so it works, right? Now, let's do something a little bit different. Let's do that same thing, and let's do it with an image. So let's go back and we'll fix the post. How do I fix? How do I delete this? Just delete. I'm going to drag my image back in. Oh boy. Oh boy. I drug it wrong. Let's update that. Server unreachable. Ooh. Okay, didn't crash, didn't crash. Let's make sure that the server works. Okay, so let's add back in our image. So we have content in, let's update. Okay, so now we have data again. Data is now in the volume for Ghost and the volume for the database. So let's go back to the command line. And if we're going to do this, again, we went stable databases. So let's stop the stuff. And I'm going to push them to Docker Hub. So what I want to do is I want to use the save and load commands. So the save and load commands are the same concept as the image save and load commands. So you can, with the save and a load, and if you've never used them, with the image save and load commands, you can export and import an image from the file system. So that maybe if you're on an offline cluster, maybe it's disconnected from the internet, you can move stuff around Docker through tarballs. That's not the same as an export import, because the export import with images doesn't keep it in the image format. It keeps it, it just becomes regular files on a file system, and you lose all the metadata about the image and all the layers of the image. Sometimes you want that. But with save and load, it's using the image format. In this case, we're not moving from an image to the file system. We're moving back and forth from an image to a volume. So if I do backup save my backup DB volume into an image named Brett Fisher backup DB, we're just going to call them. I think I could use underscores. I actually don't know. We're going to use dashes. Oh, and I misspelled it. So I'm actually gonna rename that. Let's see. Let's do a Docker tag Brett Fisher. Let's fix that. All right, and then I can do a Docker image RM backup DB. So I'll clean that up. So Docker image ls. All right, so now we have my new backup one. So now I need to do another one, backup save backup content, I think it was, into Brett Fisher backup content. All right, so now I should have, if I do the Docker image ls, I should have these two images. And they're not very big, right? The database, actually the database is 213 meg. Wow. I did not expect that. And then you can see how small this is. This is the content, and the content only has the image, and the image was really tiny. The image itself was 13K. So, the underlying image, and you can see this Docker history of Brett Fisher backup DB. You can actually see that all this is, it's a very simple root container image that is using BusyBox. And so BusyBox is actually BusyBox is what Alpine is based on, and it's a super tiny floppy size based distribution of Linux utilities. And then it copies in all of the volume data. So I don't know why the volume data on that database got so big. That is different than what I would expect it to be, but it is what it is, right? So now we have these images, so I could do a Docker push, not facepalm, Docker backup content. And since it's already got BusyBox in Hub, right, it's not going to have to push BusyBox. It's going to push only my content. So it's actually a pretty efficient storage mechanism. And it's going to push that database. Biker has some good advice on MySQL dump. You may need to add column statistics. I'd like to export my Docker MySQL volume to AWS RDS. To AWS RDS? Do you have a solution for AWS DMs? Because they're asking JSON structure in addition to backup CSV file. If I want to export my Docker MySQL tables to AWS RDS, do you have any simple solution to do that? AWS offers a DMS service, but you need, okay. So you're asking a little bit. Okay, so clarifying the question. Thank you, test. So it's all commands, right? So whatever the commands are to export from MySQL and then to import into AWS RDS, I would just automate those in a container. I wouldn't consider that a Docker solution, right? If this is like what I'm doing now, it's simply moving data from one Docker host to another. But if you were going to do a backup into RDS, which I've never heard of anyone doing, but I'm assuming you're talking about from your own MySQL in Docker, exporting it out of Docker MySQL hosted solution, and then importing into AWS RDS. That's just taking my scripts here and expanding it, right, and turning it into a cron job that's running all the time or whatever every hour or something. So I wouldn't say that you need to have a specialized utility for that, because I've honestly never even seen anyone do that. But if you were going to do that, you would probably need to shell script it out yourself. You could use my example over here under and you were watching earlier, so you know that there was that dog versus cat stuff. So you could do that. Yeah. Moving your tables from MySQL Docker container to AWS RDS. Yeah. So it would just be commands inside the Docker container. So you got to first get the stuff out of the container, and you can do that with a bind mount, right? Kind of like I'm doing here. And this backup tool is not that fancy, right? All I'm doing is, like when I do an export, all I do is I check to make sure the volume's there, and if it is, I create it, or I'll give you an error if it's not created. And then I do a Docker run that automatically removes when at the end of the Docker run. It uses the BusyBox image, and then it mounts the current working directory on whatever machine you're running Docker on. That's what goes into this backup directory. And then it mounts the volume, right, the volume name that you gave it during the command, to a standard location. It's just a location I picked to make it a standard location for using this utility. So it will mount it in there. Then I do a tarball of all of the, basically this is the volume, this is the file it's going to go into, and then I do a tar with gzip, and so that it's not that, and that's the only command that actually runs. It's just doing that one liner. And so if you just take that and put it into your own automation, you put it in maybe whatever workflow solution you have, right? And that's how you would do it. Doesn't have to be that complicated. And because if I was then going to use containers to deploy it back into RDS automatically, then I would create the opposite. I'd do another Docker run that uses some container that has that RDS tool already in it, that mounts in my backup file, then deals with the backup file in a way that's RDS compatible, right? And I'd have all those utilities in that utility container. And so you're really and then you could turn all this into one long script. It's basically two commands. One is to get the data out. One is to put the data in. You put that all into a container image, so you have all the right tools in the same thing. Maybe you put them all inside of a BusyBox so that you have just a really small little thing. Maybe you use Alpine, or you use a Ubuntu container or something like that. But that's how I would do it. Is it safe to put AWS credentials in a script in Docker? I wouldn't. So no, I would not. But you have environment variables, and if you're automating this, you're storing your secrets in some solution, like Docker secrets, Kubernetes secrets, AWS tools, all their different secret solutions, and then you get those into the container through environment variables or through, like I said, Kubernetes or Docker Swarm secrets. So I would definitely not store secrets in scripts. And there's really, it makes the script really brittle and hard to deal with, because then everything you do with it, you have to be careful not to leak it, not to leak the secrets. And then if the secret changes, you have to change the script. Like who wants to do that, right? So use environment variables. That's what I would do. All right, so I've now pushed these. So I could just pull them, right? But I think we all get it, that it does work. So I could do /r Brett Fisher, and then you can see that I have this database, and it's now What's interesting is that maybe you could have, this is like thinking out a little bit bigger, is like if you wanted to have a way for someone to easily set up Ghost with sample data, which, you know, maybe you want them to do that. Maybe it's got your templates or other stuff that you need. Um, then what you would have to do is you would have your backup tool to push this stuff to the cloud, and then for the user, they would have to run a script, and it probably couldn't be. It probably could be a compose now that I think about it, and it would have to be a little tricky. So if you're going to tell the customer, like, just do a Docker Compose up and it will download all the sample data and automatically spin everything up, um, you would either have to have an entry point script in your container so that when they ran your Docker Compose file, it would then restore. It would basically be pulling down all of the images that it needs and then restoring that data into volumes before it spins everything up, which means you need to bind mount the Docker socket. So it gets a little, from a security point of view, and it gets a little dicey. I think it would work. Um, if I did, yeah. So I'd have to extend the Docker Compose file, right? So if we did a copy of the Docker Compose file, like how would I, in other words, how would I do this in one step? So Docker, be like a Ghost demo, Ghost, not a Ghost demo, Ghost sample maybe. So if we look at the Ghost sample, it can't just do that because there won't be any of the data. So it would, so this is where we get a little fancy. So we go in here and I say, I don't want I don't want that. I want 2.4. Oh, and it's going to create, I got this. I'm spitballing. 2.4. And the reason I'm going to use 2.4 is we're going to use a feature in Compose that only works in the 2.4. Because if we're not using Swarm, we don't need the 3 stuff. So if you're just telling someone, hey, you're just going to set this up and it's automatically going to pull this stuff down, then what I have to do is I have to have a backup script, essentially, as a here. And it's going to be, how's this going to work? This is going to be like DB, maybe like that, and then the image is going to be Brett Fisher Backup. What did we call it? I already forgot. Backup DB, right? And then it's actually going to have to do depends. Nope, that one's not going to have it. It's going to be down here under Ghost. So Ghost is going to depends on. It's actually going to depend on the DB and on backup DB, right? Because it can't. Because technically we should have a depends on there, but that's not enough because depends on won't wait. It'll just start the container and it doesn't really. It controls startup order, but it doesn't control wait. So you have to use health checks, and we've done that several times on this show. And this is a very not well known feature is in dogs versus cats. Do I not have my health checks? Don't think I have my health checks. Boo. Boo that I don't have my health checks. No, I don't have them here either. Let me think about my health check samples. So there's a health check sample repo. Yeah, here we go. So Docker has a repo with all these health checks for database stuff. So for MySQL, I just need this Docker health check file. Let's do raw. This is a little fancy. I'm going pretty fast. But basically there's there is a file I need here. What are we calling it? Docker health check. Yeah, it's just a So I normally do something like this, SQL. All right, so this is a quick little script that just makes sure that SQL is running, essentially, before it considers it healthy. And then what I need to do is I need to bind mount that in here. I know this is we're getting a little bit fancy. So I need to bind mount Docker. No, it doesn't go in there. It goes in the database. So in order to add a health check to a database, you just need to, I don't need to make a custom image. I could if it's a production scenario and I want to have stuff in there, but what I really want to do is just mount it in from my local machine locally. So Docker health, MySQL, sh, into Docker health check. I think that's where it goes in the Docker file or in the. So then health check. And if I was using, I'd get better syntax highlighting here if I was using VS Code, but I'm not using VS Code right now, so I have to kind of remember exactly the syntax of the file. So, okay, so that's going to run as a health check. And if you want to look at how exactly it needs to run, all right, so it's just running command directly. So we're going to do that too. So and I'm going to mark this executable so that it works. Docker health check. All right. All right, so now what we have is we have a health check on the database. In theory, it'll work. We'll try it in a minute. I don't really need the restart always. I don't know why all the examples show that. Databases, if they crash, I usually don't want it constantly restarting over and over again on my local machine. So the default in any production scenario is always going to be restart always anyway. So it's really just for Docker Compose, and I don't like it when my apps constantly loop in a crash because it tends to just loop, and I don't want it to do that. So I don't know why people do that. Now, what I need to do here, condition is, we have to look this up. Docker Compose. So inside the Compose file guidance, under version 2, so if you go in the left menu, Docker Compose, for all of the setup, and then we go to health check. We'll just go on the right here. Down to health checks. There's this little extra feature set that says, that's actually what I want there. I want that one as well. And then, where does it say? Oh, depends on is where it's at. So if you go to depends on in Docker Hub, and I know it's a little small. I think I can actually get rid of that menu. So depends on, and it's different. Depends on is different in version 2 than version 3. And one of the things it allows us to do is to have health checks. And then, let's see, where's it at? Oh, did they change it or did it just move? Depends on conditions. There we go. Condition, service healthy, service started. So that feature right there doesn't exist in version 3. And I've been begging them to add it because it's a really, really handy thing, especially for local. So if I just copy that in, this means that Ghost will not come up unless that service is healthy. All right. And then for this one, we don't really have a condition yet. We can always just add that and we don't have a health check on the script yet, but we will service started maybe, which is the default. That's this default anyway if you don't specify it. And then down here, we're going to have to add another another depends on and condition healthy, because the DB depends on its startup automation. So, oops, depends on, it's going to be Backup DB, which is something we haven't created yet. And then the condition is going to be service healthy, supposedly. And then, yeah, so you can see there's this chain of dependencies, right? So we have the backup DB, and then we have the backup compose. I'm sorry, this is content. And then it's going to be similar to this content. And what we have to do is we have to change the entry point to restore. All right. So what we're building here, in case you're not reading my mind, yeah, health checks are definitely is mostly for databases or other containers. Recommended best practice to use health checks. So yes, every container you put into production should absolutely have a health check. Always, 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 always. Because Docker, Swarm, and Kubernetes do not know how to handle a healthy container when they don't know whether it's healthy. So the way they do that is through a health check. So absolutely, always do that. I'm a huge fan, and I will harp on people if they're going to production and they don't have health checks for every single container. And with Kubernetes, you get 2 different types of health checks, where Swarm is just 1. All right, so I'm gonna change the command here because these these volumes, by the way, these images that are storing the volumes, they don't have a default command. It's just BusyBox starting up a shell. So I need to override the command, and I probably need the command to be backup load. No, it actually needs to be the backup command. No, I know. So if I go over here to my backup repo, I actually need to steal the command out of this. And maybe I'll make this as an extension of backup. So this is actually a more legitimate use case. But what I need is the backup load command. So if I just scroll down here to the bottom, that's the save command. Here's the load command. And all it's going to do is create a volume, which in this case is already going to be created because Docker Compose is going to do that for us. And then we need to do a Docker run and to mount that volume and do a copy, right? Because in the image, oh, that's why. In the image, I don't do a gzip because when you transfer, so when you transfer images over the wire, I believe they're compressed. So I don't think you need, that's a good question. I need to think about that. Maybe I need to do a gzip or make a compression option for the images so that your image isn't really 200 meg. Because yeah, a backup of 6 meg versus 200 meg kind of sucks, right? Because you're not doing compression. All right, so over here, what are we doing? We're going to add in here the command. And it's going to make sense in a second once I add the volumes. And then we're going to add volumes. So this has got to add the volume. And we're going to have to give it a consistent name. No, we don't. We don't. We just need to do that. DB. Yeah. The DB volume is going to be attached to the root. No, I can't do that. Volume data. I'm getting my names mixed up. All right, we're copying from volume data to mount volume. Right. Yeah. And then this is no, this is mount volume, and this is the volume name. And then okay, got it. Okay, I'm sounding crazy. So this is what it's going to look like. It's just going to be that exact command. So the command, when it starts up, is going to be the copy command. And then when it's done, it's just going to stop. And I maybe need to do a restart never, I think is one of the options. Yeah, I'm on Twitch today. Twitch, Periscope, and YouTube. So yeah, it's crazy. It adds some lag. I don't see your comments as quickly, or you don't see my video as quickly because of that. But all right, so this is kind of what we're doing. And then we're doing the same copy command. And then the only thing different on this one is that it's not called DB, it's called content. So those have to happen, and this depends on content. All right, so this is how it's working, right? Our database, in order to use volume data to seed our database in this kind of hacky solution that I'm not even sure anybody should ever do. I'm not convinced. Somebody convince me in chat. You're going to need to first download images with volume data in them and then restore that data into volumes before you ever start your MySQL or your blog, your Ghost blog in this case. So you need one, some containers that will start and then do that, download the container data, which is it's what's doing here. It's downloading these images to start them up. And then when it starts them, it's going to automatically run a copy command that's going to copy into new volumes we just created, at least for this file, right? So down at the bottom, I have 2 volumes. Oops. 2 volumes down at the bottom that Docker Compose will already create for us. As soon as we hit the Docker Compose up command, it will create those. Then it will run these because they don't have any depends on. There's nothing they're depending on. And then it won't start up Ghost or the database because they both have now depends on. So they will wait. And they will wait, in this case, it will actually wait on this service to be healthy. But the reality here is that what's going to happen is that those containers are going to crash. So, I mean, they're not going to crash. They're going to exit. They're going to copy, and then they're going to be done. So let's do for 1.0. Let's not make this so complex. Let's just do. All right, let's comment these out. These depends on out just for now. And we're going to do manual startup order, which isn't ideal. I don't like necessarily doing that, but I just want to see if it'll work. So, so we're in this directory, and I'm going to do a Docker system prune. I'm going to delete all this stuff, right? Deleting all of our data, all of our volumes, all that stuff, so that when I do this, it's going to do it on a fresh machine. So if I do a Docker Compose up, but we're going to manual startup order. So Docker, and we have to do it with a -F, right? Because we're using that. If I just do a PS, it's not going to work. So I have to do a Docker Compose up, but we're going to do Vackup DB first. So I don't even really need to do an up. I can just actually do a run. The run will just run it and stop, and it'll be fine. DB. Oh, invalid health check. Test. Oh, right. So let's fix the health check. So that is not the correct health check. That one, but that will be the correct one up here. So I'm going to go ahead and add it up here. And one thing you have to worry about is I'm going to take out the Ghost. I'll put the Ghost latest because Ghost Alpine likely doesn't have curl in it. In fact, curl probably doesn't exist in this one either. So that would be a problem. It sucks when there's no curl. All right, so on this one, the command is just going to be Docker health check. All right, let's try that. 49 and 59. So these are YAML syntax errors, which happen. Oh, it's because I didn't have the right quotes. There we go. All right, now it's pulling down my backup, and presumably it's going to run that command and have and then we're going to do the content. Now I'm presuming that these are actually restoring, that command is working. Because remember, these containers up top are overriding the command. So they're going to run that, and then they're going to quit. But I'm not seeing. Let's just see if it's a different result. I cannot create container for service. Oh. Invalid restart policy. It's no, not never. Okay. It's because I never use this, so I never use that option. No. No is much more logical. I'm glad that is the case. All right, let's try one more time. What? Restart? That's not true. Well, no is the default in Docker Compose. So all right, one more time. Exited with code 0. So that's actually, it's weird that I don't have any logging. Oh, because I'm not using my backup tool. So here's one of my thoughts. I just realized I need to copy the backup tool into the images so that I can use it from inside the images. But then I would have to mount the socket. So then maybe I don't want to do that. Anyway, it might be easier, it might be easier if I'm using backup from inside backup, but that means you have to mount the Docker socket, and that gets a little weird. Where in this case, we're manually just copying from inside a container. And maybe that's the command. We just need to have the default command be that command, which if you start up this image, it will automatically copy it into the volume, which, that would be pretty cool. Whatever your volume mount is, it will automatically, assuming there's only one mounted into that location, which I guess would be the assumption because that's how it would work. All right, so let's just see what happens on DB. It's just, and if the files are already there, it's just going to override them anyway. So Docker Compose up. Oops. I have a shortcut, by the way. I have a bunch of shortcuts for Docker Compose. So DCUP for me is like Docker Compose up. All right, so it's extracting Ghost because it zips like I was thinking it does when you're copying images from a registry. Let's see what some of the comments are talking about right now while we're getting started up. Waiting for the Kubernetes volume section in Udemy. Yes, I'm working on that. Actually, today I was working on it yesterday. I've been working on it every day this week. So hopefully soon. I hate to say soon, but other things, other projects get in the way. But that's the slides are already there. The slides actually just got updated yesterday, and videos are getting recorded. I already answered that question. Yeah, everything should be a health check, like Biker says. Hello from Twitch. I'm glad to be on Twitch. Yeah, I'll be on Twitch more often in case of people that prefer Twitch over YouTube. I will just dual stream to both, and just because I have this chat that allows me to see all the chats. So, though for sanity, you want to do something where you restore from data. Just use MySQL image support. MySQL's images support to load up a MySQL backup where it would read from SQL file on startup. Though if you have a large database, it isn't ideal either because it takes time for it to start up, in which case I would create an image. That's true. So I think what maybe you're talking about is that in MySQL, in the MySQL image, if you copy a file into the image or into a bind mount of that image on startup, it will actually automatically import that. So that's the way you could do restores. That's how a lot of people use Docker Compose, is that they just bind mount instead of bind mounting the database directly, because that gives you poor performance, you bind mount a script. This is actually a great side topic, is that hub/MySQL. If you go into MySQL and Docker Hub, you will see that they talk about a configuration. So you can dump anything. Well, that's a configuration, sorry. Initializing a fresh instance. So it talks about putting anything in Docker entry point. You can actually put gzipped files of backups, and files will be executed in alphabetical order. You can easily populate your MySQL servers by mounting a SQL dump into that directory and provide custom images. So that's definitely probably what you're talking about, Archimedes. But yes, that's a really cool feature, and that might be a better way, right? Like figuring out a way to do using like a backup into a file locally and then storing that somewhere else. Again, images might not be the best, but I think there is a case for Docker images to have an ability to store template data that is then added somehow automatically on startup. So I might think a little bit more about this and see how Vackup, or maybe a separate tool related to Vackup, could help here. Yes, absolutely, Biker. My days are spent break fix. Like, yeah, it's garbage all the way down. I don't consider myself a smart person. I just have experience. So I've been doing it a long time. I don't even have a good memory anymore, so I have to store everything in some sort of system like Notion or Evernote or something, because I can't remember any of it. Thanks for being a fan of my courses, Finite Singularity. Shout out. Thanks for being a supporter of my courses. You can use the health check. Mind you, need the credentials. Archie. All right, Archie. So yeah, the video gets blurry. It may be your YouTube player. It's probably not me, because my stream says it's quality. It's quality streaming uploads. And I don't actually see that over here. Well, my bitrate is steady on Twitch, and I'm actually using Restream. So Restream allows me to stream to one place, and it streams to many places for me. And the video bitrate has been constant between 5 and 6. So it's probably YouTube or Twitch or whatever you're using. But the health check thing. So the health check thing, the Docker health checks in the example already do all that for you. So what they do is they look for the environment variables. You see here? So it actually determines whether it can get the password, and then it uses those for connecting. So that health check should work, because it's going to be using the MySQL admin command to do a ping. And it does that with the credentials that are stored in the standard MySQL way, either using a Docker secret or using a environment variable. So good question. Good point. Yeah, sorry about the 1 year only. It's it was a problem when we went live, and I can't fix it without restarting the session, and I don't want to do that. So I will hopefully not have that issue next week. You can PM me, and I can show you what I did for my anonymizer. You can probably tweak it. Not sure what you mean by the anonymizer. Let's see. We don't need that. All right. What are we doing? Let's get back to it. We're almost there. I feel like we're close. All right. So we have Ghost running. The question is, did it restore data? Okay, so this is the blog. It worked. You can't see, but I'm refreshing, and the post still exists even after we did a system wipe. So that file is legit. It's not ideal. It's not doing everything I want it to do. I would prefer some sort of command here, maybe like data copied. I'm not actually sure I can do an ampersand there. I'm not sure if that actually would work, but I would like some sort of at least line in my logging that tells me that that's finished. And then we need to get the depends on working, which is tricky because depends on up here, it's almost like these need to run. It's like I need a more intelligent command here. It needs to first check if there's data. If there's data, then and there needs to be an environment variable to say overwrite, right? Like overwrite, yes, true, no, something like that. And then it checks for that. And if that's true, then it restores the data, and then it echoes that it's done. And for some reason, my copy command is not. It's like silent, so it's not showing all the data it's copying. That might be a handy thing, is to show all the restored data. Maybe that's a verbose option. And then the last thing it should do is stay running, and ideally respond to some sort of health check. And so here's a hack on health checks is if you have a worker app running that doesn't have a server port. So let's say you have a worker process that is only doing internal stuff in the container and it has no published ports. So one of the ways that I do it is that I will have that script or whatever is running, that application, either writing to a file or writing the date, the current date to an environment variable. I like writing to a file, because then what my health check is going to actually do is just going to check for the presence of that file and that file has been written to in the last, like, let's say 2 minutes. So let's say my app writes, it basically just does a touch on an empty file called health check once a minute. And then let's say every 2 minutes or every 1 minute, my health check is running and checking to see if that file date is it less than 2 minutes old, right? Or something like that. And it's a super simple way to make sure that an app is still responding. Of course, the health check in the app running that's actually writing and touching the file, it has to be intelligent enough to know, is the app really healthy? So it might do something like check its queues or check its cache or whatever it's doing, and then only write out. So that's really application intelligence. But it's a way to get a health check and a validation of an app that doesn't run a server or a published TCP UDP port. And I bet you that I'm dumb enough that I haven't actually checked recently, but there's probably on the Kubernetes side a standard for this where people are saying always write to a file called health check at the root of the container. Just touch it. There's probably some scripts out there that automatically do this for you. I just haven't checked in like maybe a couple of years, probably about 2 years since I actually did a DockerCon talk on health checks and stuff like that. Okay. So Archie is saying my anonymizer has a part that builds a MySQL image that preloads the data, but without restoring from MySQL dumps. So it's useful for developers to get a copy of the database without the long startup. Interesting. So it's actually, that's an interesting. Yeah. I don't know if you can. Yeah. I'll PM you here or ping me on Twitter. I'll find you on Twitter. I think we've chatted on Twitter before. We always chat here, and I'm trying to think, how do I even DM in YouTube? I don't even know. Um, so yeah, that would be cool. That'd be cool. Maybe to add that into as a feature or something of the backup tool. All right. So we're back here. We know it works. Essentially, the only thing here is that I have to manually run or do an up on the backup and then the content. So this could potentially be a way for you to give people if you were someone who was a template maker for a simple solution, or you wanted to provide people sample data for an application, this might be a way to do it. Now, another way is always, most teams have already worked out this solution, right? Where they have content stored in Git somewhere or some S3 bucket, and then they have a entry point script in their app that runs before the app starts that then goes and pulls the data. Like, that's very custom, and that's specific to the team. And it would be neat, at least with Docker, if we had some sort of, if it wasn't built in as a tool, if at least we had some sort of conventions of a standard of how do we get data without a bunch of shell scripting. And, who knows, maybe Backup could be that tool. Maybe it's like Docker Compose template data or something. Maybe some other tool that's complementary to Backup, or Backup is maybe Docker Compose aware, and we'll have like these built-in commands that you do on startup. So, for the backup tool, if you're interested at all in seeing it, or if you have ideas for new features for it, I'm going to send you a link. Maybe I'll make a nice little snazzy homepage if somebody actually cares about it. But it's over the years, I had plenty of people ask me about how do I move volumes? How do I back up volumes? How do I get a volume? How do I save volumes in my local Docker machine without losing everything? Before I do like a complete wipe of my Docker installation, or sometimes Docker will recreate the VM, and it hasn't really done it recently, but Docker in the old days, when they would change their technology, they would wipe the data. But nowadays, it moves data. Even when you do WSL2, I think it actually migrates the data somehow, if I'm not mistaken, to make sure that you keep your data. But Docker usually warns you if it's going to potentially delete your volumes. Anyway, so that's it. That's that solution. Now, the other last thing for the day was swarm volumes. But I've already been running 2 hours, so I'm not sure that we can fit all that in, because that's another hour of work at least. So I will save that for the swarm volume stuff for a future talk, and we'll do another live show. And I'll actually dedicate the show to swarm volumes, and we can talk about it and demo it. And I'll actually have some plans. Like, I'll actually do things before the show instead of making it up as I go. And we can do that. Or maybe I'll have someone on, which is probably a better idea, who's tried a lot of the different solutions in a real world scenario, and actually can speak on like Gluster and Ceph and the demise of RexRay. Sadly, that RexRay is no longer being maintained, and all the other things like Portworx, Storage OS, that kind of stuff. There's a good post out there. I'm not sure if I put it somewhere on the workaround that listed some. I'll just put this in chat. The workaround blog, and they showed some stuff. They showed a small little list from, and this was a year ago. See if I can't show you this. So a year ago, they listed a nice little short list. Ceph, Convoy. I'm not actually sure that Convoy supported on Swarm. RexRay, Portworx, Storage OS. And this is not using cloud storage, which is kind of what RexRay was the ideal solution for cloud storage, but we don't really have that anymore. Anyway, I still get lots of questions about that, so we'll do that next time. Just a reminder, I'm here live every Thursday. Sorry we didn't get through the whole to-do list, but I think we definitely covered that backup stuff, and I'll keep spending time on that. And go to that repo and give me a thumbs up on the repo. Give me a star on the Docker Vackup if you want to check it out. If you want more stuff, put issues in there for ideas you have, and meet me back here next week on YouTube Live. I'm live every Thursday, almost every Thursday, and sometimes I have guests. Sometimes it's just me. Sometimes it's just you and I just chatting, having Q&A questions, and of course, for all my Patreon supporters, thank you so much for supporting me And you can support me in the details below. And you can see me live over here and my website right there with all my courses. You can buy those. And I will see you next week here on YouTube Live. Thanks for showing up and thanks for hanging out for all this 2 hours of streaming. Ciao.